The morning begins with the soft whisper of the wind in the crowns of the oaks surrounding our home in Austin. Sunlight gently touches my face, and I slowly open my eyes, feeling the warmth nearby. Daniel is still asleep, his breathing steady and calm. I smile as I look at him, feeling my heart fill with gratitude for the life we share. Our house is located on a quiet street where the neighbors are always friendly and cheerful. The garden we planted together is bursting with flowers and fragrances. Every detail here is created with love and care. In the mornings, we often step out onto the porch with cups of freshly brewed coffee, watching as the city wakes up with us. Daniel is the embodiment of kindness and wisdom. His eyes always shine with warmth, and his smile can dispel any of my doubts. He works as an architect, and his passion for creating beauty is reflected not only in his work, but also in our everyday life. As for me, I am a writer, contributing articles to a local magazine and occasionally hosting evening readings at the bookstore around the corner. In the evenings, we love to cook together, experimenting with new recipes. Laughter and conversations fill the kitchen, and the aroma of fresh dishes creates a sense of homey comfort. After dinner, we often take a walk along the Colorado River Promenade, holding hands and enjoying the coolness of the evening. Our weekends are filled with small joys, trips to art galleries, visits to local farmers markets, and gatherings with friends. We try to cherish every moment, living our time consciously and with pleasure. There is no rush or hustle in our life, only harmony and mutual understanding. Every day, I thank fate for bringing us together. For the fact that in this big world, we found each other and created our own little corner of happiness. I know that many more beautiful moments lie ahead of us, and I eagerly anticipate each new day spent together. The day was unusually warm for the beginning of autumn. I was sitting in the kitchen, sorting through the fresh fruits we had bought at the farmer's market, when Daniel entered the room with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Sweetheart, I have a suggestion I've been thinking about for a while," he began, sitting down across from me. I set the apple aside and looked at him attentively. "What happened?" He gave a slight smile. "I'd like to take a trip to New Orleans and visit my brother Ethan." Ethan. The name sounded unexpected and somewhat distant. I knew Daniel had a brother, but in all the years of our life together, he had hardly mentioned him. Their relationship always seemed like a topic best left untouched. "Your brother?" I repeated, trying to hide my surprise. "I thought you weren't in contact." Daniel looked away and shrugged slightly. "We haven't spoken in a long time, that's true. But I feel like it's time to try and mend things. Life is too short for grudges and misunderstandings." I saw a genuine desire in his eyes, along with a hint of unspoken sadness. "Of course," I replied softly. "Is this important to you?" He nodded. "Yes, very much. And I'd like you to come with me. I want you to meet Ethan." "I'd be happy to go with you," I said after a short pause. "But are you sure Ethan will be glad to see us?" Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but I have to try. After all, we're family." "Then let's go," I smiled. "Together, we can handle any difficulties." He looked at me gratefully and took my hand. "Thank you, it means a lot to me." In the following days, we busied ourselves with preparing for the trip. I tried to distract myself from my worries by researching interesting places to visit in New Orleans. But from time to time, doubts crept in. Why had Daniel suddenly decided to visit his brother? What had prompted this? I couldn't hold back any longer and asked, "Daniel, what exactly happened between you and Ethan? Why did you stop talking?" He paused for a moment, holding a folded shirt. "It's a long story," he answered quietly. "We had some differences in how we saw things, but now I feel ready to leave the past behind." His evasive answer didn't satisfy me, but I decided not to press him. Maybe he would open up to me later, when he was ready. The night before our departure was restless. In the morning, we set off. The road was long but picturesque. We passed through small towns, green fields, and dense forests. Daniel was silent, lost in his thoughts. As we reached the borders of Louisiana, the air felt different. Humid, with the scent of blooming trees and the distant sounds of music. New Orleans greeted us with bright colors and an energy that seemed to pulse through every corner of the city. We checked into a small hotel in an old neighborhood. After unpacking, Daniel suggested we take a walk and find a place for dinner. Walking down the narrow streets, I admired the architecture, the sounds of jazz coming from the numerous establishments, and the festive atmosphere that filled the air. But despite the city's charm, an unease was growing inside me. Tomorrow, we were to meet Ethan, and I didn't know what to expect. What if this meeting brought more problems than solutions? "Everything will be okay," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for being with me." Morning arrived unexpectedly quickly. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window, feeling a slight nervousness about the upcoming meeting. Daniel was already up, quietly getting ready so as not to wake me. His face reflected a mix of tension and determination. After a brief breakfast, we headed to Ethan's house. He lived in a historic part of New Orleans, where old mansions stood alongside narrow streets filled with the sounds of jazz. When we reached his home, a grand structure with columns and ivy climbing up its walls, my heart began to beat faster. Daniel knocked on the heavy wooden door. A man stood on the threshold, his features strikingly similar to Daniel's, but with a certain sharpness and mystery in his eyes. "Ethan," Daniel said shortly. "Daniel?" Ethan replied, inclining his head. His voice was deep and slightly husky. "And you must be Emily," he said with a slight smile. "I've heard about you." "Nice to meet you, Ethan," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Come in," he invited, stepping aside. We entered a spacious hall filled with art and antiques. Everywhere were paintings, sculptures, and vintage items, creating an atmosphere of mystery. I looked around, amazed at the beauty and richness of the details. "You're still collecting rarities," Daniel noted, his voice restrained. "Some things never change," Ethan responded, leading us into the living room. We sat down on a leather sofa, and Ethan offered us tea. "You have an amazing home, Ethan. Did you decorate it yourself?" "Yes, it's my sanctuary, a place where I can create and be myself," he replied, looking me directly in the eyes. His gaze was penetrating, and I felt a slight blush rise to my cheeks. At that moment, Daniel cleared his throat slightly, drawing our attention. "We came to reconnect," he said plainly. "I think we should talk." Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. "After all these years? Interesting. What prompted you?" "Time heals," Daniel replied, trying to stay calm. I sensed the conversation taking a tense turn and decided to intervene. "Maybe we should take a walk around the city. I've never been to New Orleans, and I'd love to see it through the eyes of the locals." Ethan looked at me warmly. "Great idea. I know a few places you might like." Daniel nodded, though there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. We stepped outside, and Ethan led us through the narrow streets, sharing stories about every corner of the city. His knowledge and passion for art were impressive. He showed us galleries hidden from tourists, small cafes with live music, and parks lush with greenery. At one point, we stopped at an old fountain. Ethan stepped closer to me. "Emily, you must be an artist yourself." "I teach art to children," I replied, smiling. "I love seeing them discover the world of creativity." "That's noble. There's a special light in you," he said, and his voice carried genuine sincerity. I felt a strange attraction to this man. His charisma and depth captivated me, and I caught myself wanting to know more about him. Daniel noticed our conversation and approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's time to head back. It's getting late." His voice sounded wary. "Of course," I agreed, feeling a slight awkwardness. Ethan just smiled. "Tomorrow I could show you my studio if you're interested." "That would be wonderful," I replied before Daniel could object. The walk back was silent. I sensed that something was troubling Daniel. "Are you okay?" I asked cautiously. He sighed. "Just tired. This city has always stirred mixed feelings in me." I wanted to ask more, but decided to give him space. That evening, lying in bed, I reflected on the day. Ethan's image lingered in my mind. His words, his looks, his mystery. Everything about him was alluring. But I reminded myself that I was here to support Daniel and help him reconnect with his brother. The next day, Ethan invited us to visit his studio. Daniel seemed a bit tense, but agreed to go. I was excited about the opportunity to see Ethan's work and learn more about his world. We arrived at an old mansion tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, surrounded by a lush garden filled with exotic plants. The house looked impressive and at the same time mysterious. Its facade was adorned with intricate carvings and stained glass windows through which soft light shone. "Welcome to my humble retreat," Ethan said, opening the heavy door. Inside, the house was filled with art. Paintings, sculptures, unusual installations. It all created an atmosphere of another world, where reality blended with fantasy. "This is incredible," I whispered, glancing around. "I'm glad you like it," Ethan replied warmly. "I wanted to show you the place where my ideas are born." Daniel remained silent, watching us. His gaze was cautious, but he did not intervene. Ethan guided us through the rooms, telling us about his works. Each painting had its own story, deep meaning, and emotions. I felt captivated by his world, filled with passion and creativity. "I have one more place I want to show you," Ethan said, turning to me. "It's my personal gallery." "Of course, I'd love to see it," I replied. Daniel was about to follow us, but Ethan stopped him. "Brother, maybe you could take a look at the sculptures in the garden for a while? I remember you always had an interest in stone carvings." Daniel glanced at me, then at Ethan. "All right, I'll be back soon." Ethan led me down a narrow corridor that extended to the back of the house. The walls were adorned with old engravings and photographs. "This house is full of history," I remarked. "Yes, there are many secrets here," he replied with a slight smile. We approached a massive door, which Ethan unlocked with a key from his pocket. "Please come in." I stepped into a spacious room illuminated by the soft light of lamps. The walls were covered with portraits. I moved closer and felt a chill run down my spine. Each portrait depicted a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to me. "This is incredible," I whispered, unable to look away. "I knew you'd be surprised," Ethan said quietly, standing behind me. "Who is she?" I asked, turning to him. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes full of mystery. "Her name was Lillian. She was my great-grandfather's muse. The story goes that they were madly in love but were separated." I glanced back at the portraits. The facial features, the eyes, the smile. It all resembled my reflection. "This is astonishing. I've never seen such a likeness." "When I first saw you, I couldn't believe my eyes," Ethan admitted. "You are like a living embodiment of her image." My heart beat faster. The situation seemed unreal. "But why do you keep all of this here in secret?" Ethan averted his gaze. "This room is my personal space. It's where I seek inspiration and answers." I felt a mix of curiosity, unease, and an inexplicable connection to this place. "Have you told Daniel about this?" he asked unexpectedly. "No," I replied, "but perhaps I should share it with him." Ethan shook his head. "Daniel wouldn't understand. He's always had his own view of our family's history." At that moment, the door swung open and Daniel appeared on the threshold. "What's going on here?" His voice was tense. "We're just talking," Ethan replied calmly. Daniel walked over to me and took my hand. "It's time to go." I sensed the tension between them and didn't argue. "All right." As we left the house, I glanced back to see Ethan standing at the window watching us. The drive back to the hotel was filled with silence. I felt like I had to tell Daniel about my discovery. "Daniel, in Ethan's studio, I saw portraits of a woman who looks exactly like me." He stopped abruptly and looked at me. "He showed you that room?" "Yes. Why are you reacting this way?" Daniel sighed. "It's part of his game. He's always loved creating mysteries and intrigue. But the resemblance is uncanny. Could it mean something? Don't let him influence you, Emily. Ethan knows how to manipulate people. I felt confused. But why didn't you tell me about this earlier? What happened between you? Daniel turned away. It's a complicated story. I didn't want to trouble you. There was pain in his voice, and I decided not to push him. Fine, but I think we should figure all this out together. He nodded, but his gaze remained distant. That evening, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The image of Lillian stayed in my mind. Who was she really? Why did I resemble her so much? And why was Daniel so reluctant to discuss this topic? In the afternoon, Ethan called and invited me for a walk around the city, suggesting we visit some local art galleries. Daniel declined, citing some tasks, and I decided to accept the invitation. Perhaps this was a chance to learn more about Lillian and uncover the family's hidden secrets. We met at a small cafe on the corner of a bustling street. Ethan appeared relaxed and friendly. "Glad you came," he said, handing me a cup of aromatic coffee. "There are some places I'd like to show you." "Ethan?" I began hesitantly as we stopped by the waterfront. I can't stop thinking about Lillian. Who was she really? He looked into the distance as if recalling something far away. "Lillian was my great-grandmother," he finally answered. "Our family's history is full of secrets and half-truths, but there are things you need to know." "I'm ready to listen," I said, feeling my heartbeat quicken. Ethan turned to me, his eyes filled with seriousness. "Daniel is not who he seems. In the past, he did something that tore our family apart." A chill ran through me. "What are you talking about?" "A few years ago, when our father was still alive, he entrusted Daniel with managing the family business. But Daniel used that trust for his own interests. He made deals behind our father's back, deceived partners, and eventually led the company to ruin." "That can't be true," I whispered. "Daniel would never do something like that." Ethan gave a sad smile. "I know it's hard to accept. But after that, our father couldn't bear the betrayal of his own son. His health deteriorated, and he soon passed away. Daniel disappeared, leaving me to deal with the aftermath." Tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't believe that the man I loved and trusted could be capable of such things. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Maybe he wanted to hide his guilt. Or he was afraid of losing you," Ethan suggested. I averted my gaze, trying to process what I had just heard. "But why are you telling me this now?" Ethan gently touched my hand. "I can see that you deserve to know the truth. You're a good woman, Emily, and you shouldn't live in the dark." Inside me, conflicting emotions clashed. The pain of Daniel's possible betrayal and gratitude to Ethan for his openness. But was this the whole truth? Or did Ethan have his own motives? "I need to talk to Daniel," I said, stepping back. "I understand. But be careful. He knows how to hide his intentions." When I entered the room, Daniel was sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea. "You're back early," he noted, turning to me. "We need to talk," I said firmly, sitting down across from him. His expression grew serious. "Did something happen?" I took a deep breath. "Ethan told me about your past, about how you betrayed your family." His eyes widened in surprise, then darkened with anger. "He had no right to involve you in our affairs." "So, it's true?" My voice trembled. "It's not as simple as he says. Yes, mistakes were made, but I didn't intend to hurt anyone." "Why didn't you tell me?" Tears filled my eyes. "I thought there were no secrets between us." He stopped and looked at me with pain in his eyes. "I wanted to protect you. I didn't want the past to destroy our present. But now it stands between us," I whispered. "Please, let me explain everything," Daniel pleaded, stepping closer. "I'm listening." He sat down beside me and began to recount the events. He spoke of the pressure from his father, the difficult decisions he had to make, and how Ethan refused to help in a critical moment. His version of the story differed significantly from what I had heard from Ethan. I made mistakes, he admitted, but I was trying to save the company and our family. Father couldn't accept my methods, and it tore us apart. Confusion welled up inside me. Why didn't you share this with me earlier? I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that I'd lose you. But hiding the truth only made things worse. I sighed. Daniel took my hand. I love you, Emily. Please trust me. I looked into his eyes, searching for answers, but doubts lingered. I need time to think. He released my hand and nodded. I understand. That night, I lay awake for a long time, trying to sort through my feelings. Should I trust Daniel or believe Ethan? Why did their stories differ so much? I decided that I had to uncover the truth on my own, and the only way to do that was to continue communicating with Ethan and try to piece together this complicated puzzle. The rain was pouring down in sheets, turning the streets of New Orleans into glistening mirrors reflecting the streetlights. I stood by the window of our hotel, watching as the raindrops trickled down the glass, trying to sort through my feelings. The past few days had been an emotional storm. Ethan's revelations, Daniel's explanations, and my own confusion. Daniel had left for some errands, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I decided to go for a walk despite the weather. Putting on a raincoat and grabbing an umbrella, I made my way downstairs and stepped out onto the deserted street. The sound of the rain drowned out the noise of the city, creating a sense of isolation. Suddenly, a car pulled up beside me and the window rolled down. It was Ethan. Emily, what are you doing out in this downpour? He exclaimed, leaning out of the window. Just needed some fresh air, I replied, surprised to see him. Get in, I'll take you somewhere cozier, he suggested with a smile. I hesitated for just a moment before opening the door and slipping into the warm car. Thank you, I didn't expect to see you. I often drive around the city searching for inspiration, especially during the rain, he explained, starting the engine. There's a place I'd like to show you. We drove through winding streets until we arrived at an old building with tall windows and ornate balconies. This is my second studio, Ethan said, inviting me inside. The interior was warm and inviting. The room was lit by the soft glow of candles, and the air was filled with the scent of sandalwood and spices. Sketches, canvases, and brushes were scattered everywhere. Unfinished paintings full of emotion and life hung on the walls. This is where I work on my most personal projects, he admitted, offering me a cup of hot tea. I sat on an antique sofa. Thank you for bringing me here, I said, turning to him. There's definitely a special atmosphere. Ethan sat down next to me, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. Emily, I want you to know that I care about what's happening to you. I see how you're torn between me and Daniel. I lowered my gaze, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Everything is so confusing. I don't know whom to trust. You need to trust yourself, your own feelings, he said gently. But my feelings, they frighten me, I admitted. Ethan reached out and gently touched my cheek. You're special. From the first moment I saw you, I felt a connection that's hard to explain. I looked up and met his gaze. In that moment, there was a spark between us, and the world around us seemed to freeze. Ethan, I whispered, not knowing what to say. Don't say anything, he replied softly. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room with a bright light. In the next instant, Ethan leaned in and our lips met. And then, it happened. I made it back to the hotel and went up to the room. Daniel wasn't back yet. I sat on the bed, trembling from the cold and emotions. I needed to make a decision, to sort out my feelings and figure out what to do next. When the door opened and Daniel walked in, I felt my heart tighten. Emily, what happened? You're soaking wet, he exclaimed, coming toward me. I went for a walk in the rain, I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. He looked at me closely. Something's wrong. Please tell me. I couldn't hold it in anymore and burst into tears. Daniel, I need to confess something. He sat down beside me and wrapped his arms around me. It's going to be okay. I'm here. I met with Ethan. We talked and I trailed off, not knowing how to continue. His face darkened. He tried to turn you against me again, didn't he? No, it's not that. I summoned the courage. We kissed. Silence fell. Daniel pulled away, his eyes filled with pain. How could you? He asked quietly. I don't know. Everything is so confusing. I feel terrible. He stood up and turned away. I trusted you, Emily. I thought we could get through everything together. Please forgive me. I don't understand what came over me. He took a deep breath. It's Ethan. He's always known how to destroy what others hold dear. Don't blame him. It was my choice, and I have to take responsibility for it. Daniel turned back to me. What are you going to do now? I looked up. I want to figure everything out. To understand what's happening between us. Between me and Ethan. But most of all, I want to know the truth. I've already told you everything, he said bitterly. Maybe, but I need to hear all sides. He shook his head. If you can't trust me, then what do we have left? Tears streamed down my cheeks again. Please just give me time. Time? He repeated. Fine, but know that I can't wait forever. The following days turned into a painful struggle with myself. I felt my heart tearing between my love for Daniel and an irresistible attraction to Ethan. The memories of our kiss wouldn't leave me alone, and the guilt weighed down on every thought. Daniel tried to act as usual, but I could see the fracture that had formed between us. His looks had grown distant, and our conversations were brief and formal. He avoided discussing what had happened, as if hoping that time would heal the wounds. But I knew that without an honest conversation, we wouldn't make it through. One evening, I decided to try to reconnect. Daniel, we need to talk, I said, sitting across from him in a small cafe where we had once spent our first evening together in New Orleans. He looked up from his coffee cup and met my gaze. What do you want to talk about? About us. About what's happening between us. He sighed and rubbed his temples. I'm not sure now is the right time. But if we keep staying silent, it'll only get worse, I insisted. He nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. Okay, what do you want to know? I gathered my thoughts. I want to understand why you're so categorically against Ethan. What really happened between you? Daniel tensed up. I've already told you. Our disagreements are rooted in the past, and I don't want to drag you into it. But I'm already involved, I reminded him. Ethan told me his side of the story. Now I want to hear yours. He was silent for a few moments, then replied, Ethan has always envied me. Since childhood, he's tried to prove that he's better than me. When our father entrusted me with managing the company, Ethan took it as a betrayal. He thought he deserved it more. But he said you led the company to ruin. Daniel shook his head. That's a lie. In reality, Ethan orchestrated a series of deals that put the company at risk. I tried to fix the situation, but it was too late. Our father didn't want to believe that his younger son was capable of such a thing. Confusion grew inside me. Then why does Ethan say the opposite? Because it benefits him to paint me in a bad light. He's always known how to manipulate people. I pondered. Both versions sounded convincing, yet they contradicted each other. But why would he do this now? Why is he trying to ruin our relationship? Daniel looked me in the eyes. Because he likes you. He wants to have you, even if it means destroying everything around him. At that moment, my phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. We need to meet. I have something important to show you. I felt my heart tighten. What else did he want to reveal? Is that from him? Daniel asked, noticing my hesitation. I didn't hide it. Yes, he wants to meet and show me something. Daniel clenched his jaw. Don't go to him. Please. But if he has proof of what he's saying, I need to see it. He's just playing with you, Emily. Don't let him. I stood up. feeling the emotions boiling inside me. I can't just ignore this. I need to know the truth. And what about us? He asked quietly. Are you willing to risk our relationship for his words? I want to save our relationship, I replied. But to do that, I need to get to the bottom of this. He lowered his eyes. I can't stop you, but remember, every action has its consequences. I nodded and headed for the exit, feeling his gaze on my back. We met with Ethan in a quiet park, where the old trees created a sense of seclusion. He looked serious, holding a folder in his hands. Thank you for coming, he said, handing me the folder. These are all the proofs that Daniel deceived us all. I opened the folder and began flipping through the documents. Financial reports, correspondence, contracts. Everything pointed to Daniel's involvement in dubious dealings. I can't believe it, I whispered, feeling the ground shift beneath me. I didn't want you to find out this way, but you need to know who you're dealing with, Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. Why didn't you reveal this earlier? I asked. I tried, but Daniel always found a way to wriggle out of it. Now that you're close to him, I was afraid he might harm you too. Tears started streaming down my cheeks. I don't know whom to believe. You're both telling me completely different things. Ethan stepped closer and gently wiped the tears from my face. I understand, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are genuine. I want to protect you. I took a step back. But I can't just give up on Daniel. Despite everything, I still love him. Ethan sighed. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. Just be careful. At that moment, a voice sounded behind us. How touching. We turned to see Daniel standing there, his face contorted with anger. Spying on us? Ethan asked coldly. I warned you, Emily, Daniel said, ignoring his brother. He's using you to get to me. What are you doing here? I asked, feeling the tension rise. I was following you to make sure you were safe, he replied, his eyes blazing. Ethan smirked. You've always been paranoid. Daniel took a step forward. Give her the folder. And why should I? Ethan shot back. Because it's a fake. You fabricated those documents to turn her against me. I looked at both of them, not knowing what to think. Enough, I shouted. I'm tired of your games. If either of you truly cares about me, then stop lying. They fell silent, staring at me. I'm going back to the hotel to think about what to do next, I declared. You two sort things out between yourselves. I turned and walked away, leaving them behind. Tears blurred my vision, and I could barely see the path ahead. I needed time and space to figure out how to move forward with my life. Back in the room, I packed my things. I decided to leave New Orleans and return to Austin. Maybe some distance would help me sort out the situation. As I was leaving the hotel, Daniel appeared at the entrance. Where are you going? He asked, noticing my suitcase. Home. I need some time alone. Please, don't go. We can fix this. I shook my head. I don't know whom to trust anymore. I need to find the answers on my own.